Not small men, women's football insiders saying what they really think.
Welcome, Baroness Sue Campbell. How fantastic to have you on Not Small.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
The idea is just to kind of get really what's inside lots of different people's heads about what is happening in women's football, predominantly in England. So you arrived at the FA in 2016?
Yeah, correct, yeah.
The game plan for growth strategy came out in 2017.
Yes, I took about I'd worked in sport all my life, but I hadn't worked in a governing body and I hadn't worked in football. So I took 6 months to listen. So I spoke to everybody, both colleagues internally, people externally. I met fans and I talked generally to people about where they thought the game was. And what I found was there were a lot of what I call missionaries. You know, people forging, doing their best, but there was no plan. There was no great strategic vision about where could this game actually go. And so although I'd promised Martin Glenn, the then chief exec, that I would write a strategy, I went to him after 6 months and said, I can't write you a strategy. And he looked at me most despondently. I said, but I can give you a plan. And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, I can give you a targeted, focused plan. And I think we should pick 2 or 3 things that change the dial, and then I can write you a strategy. So he said, okay. So we did the plan, and we only have three objectives. 1, double participation. 2, double the fan base. 3, put us on a journey towards winning the World Cup in 2019. So that's
actually meant the Euros. When you said World Cup, you meant the Euros.
I did, just I got that wrong, didn't I? If I'd known. But yeah, no, it was 2019 World Cup that he wanted to win. But I didn't think I think what I'd learned from UK sport that is any world-class system takes 6 to 8 years, really, from the get-go, from when you start to design a world-class system, not just a good system, but the best, to get the right people and the right seats on the bus and to get the thing where you need it. Because it's not just about what you do in England, it's what you're doing in the clubs. And so, you know, as an example, in 2018, we decided to do a full-time professional league. 1, because we wanted the players to get the salaries and payments that they deserve. But secondly, because without that full-time professional league, England weren't going to make it to the next level. So there's a lot of pieces you have to put into the system in order that the system as a whole can kind of give you those players who are ready to play on that platform at that level. So there was a lot of what I call system development. The other thing was doubling the fan base, doubling participation. We knew we needed to get into schools, but to have an impact quickly, we knew that wasn't, I couldn't do that quickly. I know the education system really well. I've been working in it for a long time. And so we started those conversations, but we introduced Wildcats, which was this community program run by volunteers with 200 in year 1, and we're now up to 2,000. And these are clubs for young women, young girls, aged between sort of 5 and 11, who've probably never kicked a ball, start to watch the Lionesses or somebody, the clubs, and they start to want to play, and they can go along, have a very enjoyable time, not too competitive, where they get introduced to the game, they make new friends, they have a wonderful time. And those were very successful very quickly. They really became a really big part of our success at beginning to get girls interested. And then we were really lucky in 2019, Barclays came in to fund the Super League and the Championship. And they offered us some money to help with the schools programme. And that really allowed us to move the schools programme on. Now in 2024, we're in 75% of all primary and secondary schools in the country are offering football either in the curriculum or lunchtime or after school. Pretty well in primary schools, pretty well all in the curriculum, which is terrific. So we've gone from sort of a plan to a real strategy, which is how do we get girls playing the game? How do we get those who have talent identified and nurtured and on a journey? How do we still provide great opportunities? People just want to play for fun. So we've made massive progress. I think we've now got just over 5 million girls and women playing the game.
Which is an incredible thing. I mean, I'm always interested when one kind of puts together, and it's an enormous job in where you were at that point in 2016, 2017, a plan or a strategy. Presumably, like, I don't know, when I approach something like that, I have an opening hypothesis. I have a sense of what I think is going on and where I think it needs to go. So what was your initial hypothesis, and did it change as within the first 6 months about where the women's game was and where it should get
I'm not
to?
sure I came in with a hypothesis. I think I came in with an open mind. I'd seen, on the one hand, I've worked at Youth Sport Trust for 20 years, which was sort of schools sport. I'd worked at UK Sport, which is our Olympic and Paralympic medals organisation, our high performance agency, and I really got the most amazing insight into what real success, what it took to be really successful on the world stage, whether I was in cycling or rowing or sailing or, track and field or wherever it was. And we shaped that high performance system so that we were the most successful Olympic and Paralympic nation in the world in 2012 for our population size. And we went on and actually even went further in Rio, which was amazing, in both Paralympics and Olympics. So in my head, I knew what performance sport looked like. I knew what kind of grassroots sport would require. I'd never been in a wonderful position like I am in football, where I could connect the top and the bottom. I kind of knew what was in both, but how to connect them was the trick. So I spent that first 6 months just listening. And I think if you think of the top of the pyramid as the shop window is where you're showing the very best of what you've got. But it's pretty useless if you go into the shop, there's nothing on the shelves. So you've got to stack the shelves as well as open out the shop window. And you've got to try to keep them moving in parallel. In other words, it's no good showing off the game, if you like, and people go into the store and there's nothing there. And equally, there's no good if you've stacked the shelves, but there's no shop window. So
Yes.
I realised you've got to do both in parallel. And I guess, I said when I first came into the FA, I said, I know there's a mountain up there, but I feel like I'm on the beach and there's a lot of heavy cloud and I can't quite see what the mountain is. So I'm going to have to work really hard to understand what is that mountain and how do I construct it so the mountain is built very soundly and youngsters who want to get to the top of it can see their journey, and those who are quite happy being on the beach with me are equally happy. So that's in my mind. I think it was how did I connect the visions that years of being in sport have taught me? How could I connect it into one big mountain? And of course, the great thing is you get to the top of the mountain, you win the Euros. And down me, you look over the hill, there's another mountain.
Yeah,
so,
there's always another mountain to climb.
No, I have an expression that says better never stops. So I don't think you ever get to the end of the journey, but certainly it was a pretty special moment, that was.
No, it was extraordinary. It was uniting a nation, I think, as well. And I think it, in that moment, changed a lot of attitudes. Let's be honest, from men, I think in particular, about thinking, that's what a successful England team looks like. So we won't dwell on that about the most successful England team there has been for quite a long time. But it's really interesting. You intimate it here, and I think I've seen you quote on it a number of times. This really important way of handling the top of the game and then the rest of the game. And I just want to sort of this will be a quote you recognise. It's a short one, just because I think it really kind of sums up about the challenge that there is, because there must be so many dynamics pulling within the women's game in the position you've been in, who want their thing and they want it in that time frame. So I think when you spoke to Suze Rack and the Guardian, and you're saying it isn't, you're talking about some of the big clubs, and you're saying it isn't easy, they're ambitious, but when you're ambitious, driven, and want to achieve, you don't feel you have time, which suggests the bigger clubs want things to happen sooner rather than later. But you go on to say that the important thing is that we don't let the head leave the body. If the head leaves the body, there's no integrity to the football pyramid, and I think they understand that. So it's just me now, there's no one else listening. Do they understand that? And where do you think the game's got to? And I should mention, because obviously it's so many fantastic achievements, And yet, and maybe it's a good thing and not a bad thing, but next season's WSL will have nothing but Premier League backed teams in it, while other teams get into financial difficulties. So this, I think, because your approach is clear and enormous integrity, but I just wonder how you grapple with that and where you think you've managed to get it to in terms of this head not leaving the body. And also maybe with some people listening, what that means. What was in your head when you thought you don't want the head to leave the body? What was the fear?
Well, I believe development needs to be holistic. And what I mean by it is if you move any part of the game too quickly, you'll detach it from the rest. The moment you detach it, you begin to create particularly because our whole system is not that mature yet. You know, it's an immature, quite vulnerable system. So yes, we've got more girls playing. Yes, we've doubled the number of coaches working in the women's game. Yes, we've increased the number of referees. Yes, we've redesigned the talent pathway. But we don't have the funding for the talent pathway that we need. It's minor. So if what I mean is, if you let the rich people and the Premier League clubs are rich in clubs, if you let them take that top away, do you take the head off the body? In other words, does the body start to think you can't get? I want any girl who is sitting in a primary school anywhere in this country, who has the desire, has the talent, is prepared to put in the work, prepared to sacrifice things you have to sacrifice to be the best. I don't want her to look at the top and go, but I can't get there. What would be the point of that? It takes away the whole essence of a healthy system. So I don't want the head to leave the body. However, and if you were talking to me and I was the director of cricket or the director of women's netball or the director of women's rugby or the director of hockey for women, not that there is one, you would get the same answer, which is we all want the professional players to be given the salaries they deserve. We all want the women's game to thrive. We're challenges, we haven't got the money. So, we're lucky in football in that we have got people who are subsidising, funding the women's game. And the ambition has got to be, how do we get to a place where any club can make it because it doesn't require that kind of subsidy? That is a really tough question. And if you were to ask netball or cricket, they're struggling with the same things for the women's game. We all want the top end of the game to thrive, for players to get the salaries they want, to make sure we've got the best interest of players' welfare, great physios, doctors, sports science, sports that. But the reality is that costs a lot of money. And the reality is, who's paying for that? And if you go out and you look, broadcasters don't want to give us a lot of money for our product. Commercially, Barclays have been awesome and remain awesome. But, there's not many of them around. The reality is there isn't a lot of money that we can generate. And that's what NewCo is about. How do we generate more income to make the game more sustainable? Do I believe all of the clubs think like I do? No, I don't. I'm afraid they have a model, which is the men's model, where commercial value is what it's all about. It's not about player development. It's not about what's right for men or for women. It's about income. It's about, it is about success because success generates your money. But I'm not sure it's about a real passionate commitment to the women's game. Now, I'm sure some of those people would argue with me and say, but we've invested in the women's game for years, and they have. But when you try to collect them together to create a collaborative way forward, they split off again because actually they want their way forward. They don't want a collaborative way forward. And in my view, for the women's game to thrive, survive, and move on to a different platform, it needs to be a collaborative approach across the whole game, and it needs to be a collaborative approach across clubs. That's a different approach to the one they're used to, and it's hard.
So that, when you see that, sounds almost like a monkey puzzle. It almost kind of
It is.
insoluble, because what you're saying is, that's too depressing. I can't accept that answer. I'm sorry, it's just too depressing. But well, listen, you are at the top of inside of the game. You can compare it with lots of other sports, so there's a heck of a lot of insight.
Well, I think you have to
there.
recognise the women's sport, and I don't like using these words, but this is the reality. Still a poor relation, and
yeah, it is.
And financially, it just doesn't attract the kind of investment that the men's game does, even when the men's game is not the very top of the men's game. You know, it's a conundrum that we have to try and manage. You know, it's tough.
About which bit of the conversation about this big clubs versus like
how do you resource and finance this so that it can be a new model for excellence, not a replica of what we've seen before? Because if, you know, we want this to be something that transforms women's football. We want this to be something that puts a stake in the ground about equity for women. Not just in football, but in society as a whole. I think football's such a powerful vehicle to establish wider societal shift. But, you know, how much do you compromise to get where you want to, and how much do you have to hold the line and maybe not get where you want to right now because you just don't want to give away too much? It's hard. This is hard stuff. This is not easy stuff.
This is very, very hard stuff, and that's why it can feel unsolvable or too far down the line.
Nothing's. I have a slide which has impossible on it with the "im" crossed off. I believe anything is possible, but you've got to be willing to be agile, and you've got to be willing. You know, when I took over at UK Sport, and we were 10th in the medal table, and I had a brilliant young man working with me called Peter, who did all our work and said, we can be fourth if. And I said that to everyone, you are mad. No way, it's impossible. And that's when I produced my slide. And I used to put it up, and I used to have impossible, and then I used to slash the "im" off and say, it's doable. It's doable if you believe it. It's also something we're going to have to fight for. It's not going to come to us easily, and it's tough.
So that you had a magic spell that meant whatever is in your head right now about how to crack this, how to make the women's game grow differently from the men's game, to grow in an equitable way, and people just had to do the thing that you say they need to do. How should it go? What should happen if at the moment the head does seem to be leaving the body? What's your answer to it?
Well, first of all, I think, you know, I don't want to say it comes back to money, because I don't ever believe money. Money is enormously important, but it mustn't drive your vision. You know, your vision's got to be driven by your ideals, your beliefs, your philosophy, and what you're trying to do. And, you know, we have to remember what we're trying to do here. And what we're trying to do here is bigger than football. I know that might sound grand, but it's bigger than football. Football is the vehicle, but we want girls. You know, I talked to a group of head teachers 3 weeks ago, and during the coffee break, I said to them, you know, what's the biggest problem in school right now? Gender inequality. What do you mean? The girls are being treated really badly by the boys. This is secondary school head teachers telling me that's their biggest problem in their schools, the behaviour of boys to girls. How are we living in this century, and that is a problem? You know, that cannot be what we were ever, you know, that's what people like me have fought their lives to change. So, you know, why are we still there? And can football, you know, this great vehicle of men's sort of, you know, sporting national game, can we change the record? Can we make it a game which is equally desirable for girls to play, which is equally resourced for girls, which is equally profiled like the men's game? And I don't see why we can't. But you try persuading the broadcasters, or you try persuading people that this is something of greater value than simply how many boxes you've sold into a home. It's really hard. But I genuinely believe that we have to set a model which is about collective a collective which can achieve more than individuals on their own. And that is, as a very kind of female approach to things, I'm sure people would say, and it might be a bit idealistic, people would say, but I believe what changed the dial for us in the Olympic and Paralympic movements was not, everybody wants to say it was money. No, it was not about money. I know everybody told me it was. It was not about money. It was about creating a sense of collective. It was about saying, if you're really brilliant cycling, I want you to go and help synchronized swimming. If you're really brilliant rowing, I want you to go and help. Because when we got to that point of collective work, everybody got better. Not just the people at the bottom, everybody got better. That isn't how professional sport thinks. It's about self. If we've got to create a sense of collective purpose, you know, why can't we have centralised rights for all of the commercial products that we sell in football clubs for the women? You know, why can't we put it in the middle? Because the NFL model, the National Football League model in America, shows me you have collective rights, you generate a heck of a lot more money. All right? Why can't we?
Not as in all the commercial rights, it's not just the broadcast rights.
No, commercial rights. You know, why can't we have one shirt supplier? Do you imagine how much money you'd get for that compared to each club negotiating a shirt supplier? But you're changing their model. You're changing something they've been doing for years and years and years into a model that says, no, this can generate more. But it's difficult. How do you create a sustainable financial model? You know, how do you make sure that you've got a salary floor? So you're not asking young women to play for pittance. Equally, how do you create a salary top? Oh boy, I mean, you know, I could be executed in the Tower of London for that question. I mean, how do you create a sustainable future? Because otherwise what will happen is what happens in the men's game. Every time there's more money, the wages go up.
So listen, I mean, you know, this is not about me, but I agree with you, you know, 1,000,000%. And I think an awful lot of people in the game, maybe not the richest end of it, agree with you 1,000,000%. And but I think you said something that, and in a way, this audio documentary series is about finding questions that you're putting brilliant insight that you're giving, but potentially sparking someone else out there that maybe has some answers. Or I think, as you put it, when I come back to this, the idea is collective, about a women's football industry, which is about the collective good. So let me ask you the same question two ways. One thing is, like, who is that collective that you're thinking of? And it's maybe the same question, but who is women's football for, do you think?
That's a great question. Let me start with the second bit. Women's football should feel like it's the right of every woman and every girl if they want to do it. And it's the right of every woman and every girl, whether they wish to play recreationally, whether they wish to play on a Saturday competitively with their friends and have a wonderful time, or whether they wish to be the very best that they can be and go up that talent pathway and represent a club and possibly the Lionesses. So our job at the FA is to make those pathways possible and to make that opportunity possible. The top of the game has to be a place that any youngster can aspire to get to. So who is the game for? Number one, it's for the players. That's all we're in it for. You know, number two, coaches. You know, beyond that, all those support staff, you know, whether it's welfare or safeguarding or physical conditioning, all of those people matter. But number one, you have to have a player-centred approach. And again, going back to UK sport, one of the things I did was I changed the funding regime completely from a plan-based system to an athlete-centred system. You can't have money for writing a nice plan. You can only have money if you're producing great performers. And if you're going to be producing great performers, then I'll give you some money to write your plan. But don't come to me with fiction about how many people you can get to the Olympics when actually you probably can't. Tell me who you've got. and then we'll assess what, you know, we'll give you the money, then show me the plan to help those players, those athletes, those swimmers, those gymnasts make it to the podium. And I think you have to have a player-centered approach. And if you take a player-centered approach, you make very different decisions than if you make a club-based approach or even an England-based approach. Because the welfare of those players is everybody's business. You know, whether whatever club they're in, whatever England team they're in, we should all care. We should all care that we're giving them the best possible chance to succeed. So the game is for the players, number one, for the players.
In your Olympic plan that you mentioned, that's so interesting about athletes helping athletes in different sports and at different levels. Clearly that helped 2012 produce, and after as well, the most incredible medal tally at the top of the game. So I wonder, you've talked a lot a bit about, you know, if it's the players, then players at all levels, the ones who, for the most part, will never play professional sport because there isn't enough space. Then most people only ever do it recreationally. So how did it work with the Olympics and having a plan that made sure there was money, support and attention for the 99% of the players, the athletes, that weren't the elite ones? Because maybe that's what you're kind of suggesting for football.
Yeah, no, remember UK Sport is the high performance agency. And then you've got Sport England, Sport Scotland, Sport Wales and Sport Northern Ireland. And their job was participation and talent pathway.
So how did they plug in? How did they plug into the elite plan? Well, was there a comparable plan, funded plan for them?
They got a lot more money than we did. I mean, Sport England's always had a lot more money than the Excellence programme had. Did we connect those two agendas well enough? No. And one of the lessons learned from London 2012, you know, so let me take two specific areas. When I came into UK Sport, I asked how many women were winning medals. And I say, I can't remember the number now. And I said, by London, I want it to be 50-50. Why are we not winning medals, more medals than the women's thing? And I went and I talked, you know, rowing was a classic. I went to see Catherine Granger and the other three who'd won the silver medal in Sydney and asked them, why are we not winning more medals in women's rowing? Well, because we don't get enough women coming in and we haven't got the right coaching structure. And then when you start to look at it, you go, aha, right, now I get this. And, you know, Helen Glover, who won the first gold medal in London 2012, a rower, came as a result of our Giants campaign, where we said, if you're 5'10" and you don't mind going backwards, put your hand up, we'll see you in a boat. And, you know, she, bless her, came along, put her hand up, went through some tests, brilliant, put her in a boat, wins the first Olympic medal in London 2012, gold medal in London 2012. So you've got to think differently. The women's game, like women's medals, you have to think differently. And by the time we got to London, I think 48% of the medals were won by women. Did we use that to drive the vision for women as participants? Did we use that to drive the vision for women as coaches, women as referees? No, we didn't. Not well enough. No.
But that's crucial, isn't it? But why? What happened? Why did that not happen?
Because
we had a whole generation of like participants
afterwards. And legacy happens before. So if you take Euros 22, 3 years before the Euros, I went to UEFA to ask some money to do a legacy programme. And they started talking about 2020. I said, no, I need the money now. And they went, no, you need a legacy programme. I said, no, you have to build a legacy programme. You know, so and I had a wonderful young woman who came and joined us, who led that programme. And we created, in the areas, in the cities where the games were being held, we created host local organisations, which had only clubs, schools, local authorities, everybody, county football associations, the lot. And we came up with plans and we said that we had available, when the Euros happened, 500,000 new opportunities across the country to play, to coach, to referee, and that we would fill those by 2024. We'd filled them within a year. So, but yeah, if you don't think about it until afterwards, that moment has gone. Because those moments happen. So what I said to the players when we were talking about winning, I said, winning is the most amazing moment in your life, but it'll be gone like that. It's what you do with the platform it gives you that makes you a great athlete. And it's the same for those of us who organise sport. Great events need a lot of preparation. You know, I remember coming out of London 2012 and hockey, I don't know if you remember, got the bronze medal there. Not to tears, but a bronze medal in the end. Wanted that gold one. And I remember somebody telling me that all these little girls had gone rushing down to local hockey clubs and they were told, sorry, we're full, we'll put you on the waiting list. Well, I'm sorry, little girls don't wait, right? None of us wait. So if you haven't prepared the ground, you can inspire, but so what? That's why, you know, it's important that you grow those, you know, like I said about the shop, you fill the shelves ready so that when the shop window is there, nobody says, oh, I want one of those. You go in and there's something to get. So I learned a lot from that.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah.
And so presumably I'm thinking about women's football now in this country. And as you say, they're inspired by the Euros, by the top end, or watching a WSL match on Sky or whatever. You know, they need to be able to go somewhere and go, I want to play. So it's thinking about player development now in this country as well. We can see some ways in which it's in a good place, but I'm just thinking about what you just said about the shop, be able to go to the local shop. At the moment, as I understand it, I think player development happens predominantly, I'm not quite sure what they're still called, RTCs or academy type things.
It starts now with Discover My Talent, which is a local community program where we're working with community trusts, and we're looking for talent that won't find us. We're looking for those local community schemes, probably not affiliated to the FA, just happening, and they are referring. So we've had over 3,000 referrals from those schemes, and all of those youngsters have now been tracked and looked at, and we've got a hardship fund, so that allows us to give youngsters which is sponsored money, which is we're allowed to give youngsters a bit of support with transport or whatever's needed to get them to the local DTC. The ETCs are now, we've got a network of them that are within an hour of most kids' travel. So most of the RTCs were great, but there were 35 of them across the whole of England. The reality.
So how many ETCs? ETC stands for
Emerging Talent Centre, and there's 75 of them, I think now. But you might have to just check that number. But 75.
No, sure. So there are 75 emerging talent centres around the country, geographically spread, so people can find them.
Yeah.
So people get referred from all these bunch of local schemes. 1,000, I think you said, showed
Clubs
interest.
They
then got referred.
They refer them into the ETC. Yeah.
I see. And if you consider there as something, I think if you look at in the women's game in this country, down to sort of National League, South and North, and the ones below that, I think it was roughly about 100 clubs. Does that mean that each club would have access to be an ETC, or where are they distributed? How do they work?
Yeah.
And can anyone, or does this come down to money again? Will they get money to be an ETC?
No, we put some funding in, but equally, what we've now got at the FA, we have a club strategy where if you only are running voice section, you get 1 star. If you're running a boys and girls, you get 2. Boys, girls and disability, you get 3. So if you're providing opportunities, and each of those comes with a different level of investment. So we're driving this change, and by 2028, we hope to have 1,000 clubs who are offering age range, opportunities for girls to compete at every level. So we're not just, the women's game is no longer sort of in a box on its own. We've now affected all of the main strategies of the FA, so that any strategy that's emerging has got women and disability locks into it, so that we can really be football for all, which is what we say we are. And that, that is really important. So you've got Discover My Talent, ETCs, and then we've got PGAs, professional game academies. And the professional game academies are linked to the Super League and Championship clubs. So think of those as your finishing school. And that's all we're investing in. Doesn't mean that that's all that's happening. It's all the FA can afford to invest in. We have, I don't know if you know the average cost of a men's boys academy in a Premier League or even an EFL club, but it's fairly considerable. It's in the millions. I have a total budget of 3 million to pay for my entire talent pathway for the women.
Who gave you that budget? Where does it come from?
Most of some's from the FA, and some has come from the Premier League. They have given us a grant to help us.
It sounds like it could do with a couple of zeros.
It could do with at least multiplied by 10 plus.
Yeah, 1 0.
Yeah. And the PGAs, the clubs invest in those. We give them an amount of money. I couldn't even tell you what it is off the top of my head. But the reality is, a lot of the clubs, Super League Championship clubs, are struggling to maintain a senior squad, let alone run a professional game academy for youngsters. Absolutely. So, and what you don't want is a poor PGA. You want a high quality experience for those young players. So there's a lot to do on the talent pathway. I mean, that's going to be one of the next huge shifts in the game. We've got to find much better investment from somewhere. You can imagine I work on that pretty well every day. I'm a bore on it. But we're trying to find more resource to that because...
But it also feels like, it just feels like ultimately things are very much about money, but also they're about time. Is that even with the best will in the world, what you're describing sounds like it is, let's take a guess, a decade in the making. If you imagine a world whereby there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of ETCs, a girl playing anywhere could be in a 20-30 minute journey of somewhere. They will be funded. They would have qualified coaches. There will be good facilities. The dream, although it should be the reality, but the dream, it feels like, and just to be realistic, it feels like the best one in the world. That could be many, many years away. It almost comes back to the thing I was mentioning earlier when we were talking about the protagonists inside the women's game, from the very top, from the richest clubs down to the middle and the smallest ones, have different timescales. It sounds a bit like potentially so many of the interested parties, protagonists, call it what you will, in the women's game, have time. They could see a plan develop over 5 or 10 years, but the ones who've invested, they would feel a lot of money at the top, want to get their money back sooner rather than later. And that your job is, in no small part, has been about managing the different time perceptions that all these people in the game have, because they're pulling against each other, it feels like.
Yeah, I think that's a really good analysis. I don't want to create a picture that says the people who've invested a lot are not part of trying to help solve this, because some of them are. But I agree with you that this, it's hard because in some ways, we've won the Euros, the Super League is on the television, the players are now household names. It looks like it's all great, and it is at one level, but is it built on sand or is it built on something more than that? And so the last 2 years, we, the FA, have invested and supported the development of the Women's National League, which is Tiers 3 and 4. We've just introduced minimum standards into Tiers 3 and 4. Now, that's taken a lot of careful planning and a lot of subtlety, but you're watching the National League, the Women's National League, growing, evolving and developing. And we've got to do that because we don't want the gap between 3 and 2 or 4 and 3 or 2 and 1 to become so big that we can't connect it. Because one of the greatest strengths of British sport is the pyramid competitive structure. It's one of the things that makes us a bit different. That's not how it is in the States. You have a very different system in the States. You're good in school, you win a free scholarship to a university because they've got them in droves for different sports. You spend your time in the university and the best kids get into professional, but it's not a pyramid as such. It's a pathway, but it's not a pyramid. We've got a competitive pyramid so that, like the FA Cup, any team can go from grassroots and win all the way through to the final if they're good enough. Those sorts of things make our game unique, special, and really exciting. And I don't want to lose that.
Do you wish, in that case, that some of the way that money flows from the top to the bottom in the women's game was more redistributive than it currently looks? And I'm thinking about the way that broadcast revenue is distributed to the WSON Championship and kind of not really below. I'm thinking about the way that FA Cup prize money goes predominantly because of where it never mind, it should be more, obviously it should be equal, but I'm thinking about the way it is currently in the latter rounds, disproportionate, like the men's FA Cup in the earlier rounds. It seems like there could be opportunities.
Well, let me just cover off the FA Cup. When I first came in, the money going into the FA Cup was not great. We then got a £3 million uplift, and we put that very much at the bottom. We didn't try and put that at the top. We didn't move the top very much at all. I then got another 3 million last year. That thanks to the support of the chief exec, who's very committed to getting to equity. We've got a little journey to go on there, but we're getting there. So now we're 6 million better off than we were 2 years ago. And we have put a bit more at the top at this time because but if you listen to the feedback we're getting, a lot of those smaller clubs have made enough money to look after themselves for a couple of years out of the FA Cup money for the women's game. So we'll keep looking at that. You're right. And developmentally, that's the only money these people get. So it's important that we make sure it's distributed down the pathway. So, I think we're making some progress there. The problem in terms of broadcast distribution is the reality is the clubs would tell us, other than maybe a few of them, that it's costing them a lot of money to run the women's game and they need support, and we want to improve standards. So let's just take a simple issue like physical conditioning or doctors or physios. Not that long ago, even your biggest clubs were taking someone from the men's game and sort of lending them across the fence once a week or something. That's not what we want. Women are different. I know this is very hard for people to conceptually understand, but their bodies are different, their minds are different, and certainly
women are not small men.
No,
hence the title. Right. Hence the title for this audio docuseries.
Yeah, well, they're not. So things like menstrual cycle, pelvic floors, all the problem we've had with ACLs. All of those things, if you look at any injury in men's football, you will find a million blooming references on it. If you look in women's, you'll find 3 or 2 or none at all. And the danger is because the men's game is perceived to be so successful, the view is, oh, well, we can send the men's fitness guy and it's only just add a bit of water and you'll be okay. No, it's not. And one of the things I had to do when I came into the FA was make myself incredibly unpopular in St George's Park by saying, I don't want the 4th best person in the women's game. I want somebody who knows the women's game. And they'd look at me and go, well, we don't employ those. Well, blooming well employ those people. Because I don't want I don't want people who are not familiar with elite women. We've now got that. And we've got a great coach. And blowing me, we're successful. It's kind of like, come on, does this all make some sense here? And again, in the clubs, some of the clubs have got people who are very familiar with elite women. An awful lot of them don't. And so we set our licence requirements to a high standard in order to get the right people around the player. Because you asked the question, who's the game built for? The players. Who do we care about? The players. What do we want to look after? Their welfare and health and development. So you've got to have a good physical conditioning, but you've got a good sports psychologist, etc., etc. You can't do that on Formula One. You can't do it on pennies. It costs money. So that broadcast distribution, yes, of course, we desperately want that money to go further down the pyramid, but right now we're having to use it to improve the professional environment for our players.
No, I understand. Listen, I've only got another few minutes. I just want to ask you one other area. I mean, I could talk to you for hours and hours, but you'd get very bored with it. But the area, club free country. Okay, I think it was in the game plan for growth about the real significance of having a national team led strategy. In other words, if we get a successful national team, people will see that, and we can see what's happened very, very much. About how that gives an example, and clearly it does. And we have some not just skillful, but incredibly eloquent women playing in that team.
They're really
brilliant. I mean, the Leah Williamson debate at the Oxford Union, I think, the other day was just brilliant. It should be enforced viewing for men, basically. But in terms of the club v country, how is that? How should the balance work? How does that balance work between someone like the FA prioritising the national team versus the clubs? Because clearly in any sport there can be a bit of friction between club and country. How do you think that has worked out, and where should it go, the club v country?
Well, let me start by saying where I think it's at now. Certainly when I came in, remember where I came in, there wasn't a full-time professional league. There wasn't a television contract, broadcast contract. There wasn't a sponsor. So our first priority was, how do you raise the profile of the women's game? And the easiest thing, sitting in the FA, is to do that with the England team. And then the other bits have emerged: 2018 full-time professional league, 2019 first sponsor, 2020 first broadcast deal. You think about that, it's all fairly new still, isn't it? It's fairly recent. So what I've always said, and I still believe to be true, is that the England game can drive the visibility of the game. So, for example, at the Euros, we kept a track of all of the people who bought tickets, and then we dispersed it to the clubs to let them know who in their area had bought tickets. Because the women's game, the England women's team, was without question the iconic, if you've got a shop window, it's the bit that's got the lights all around it. It doesn't make the other less important, but it was the kind of bit that came through your eye to the window, and then you start watching the other bits and start looking at Super League. And that, I think, is still true. However, I think as the clubs gain greater momentum, greater coverage, and again, I'm not talking about next year, I'm talking down the line, whether that dynamic shifts, I'm not sure. And there will always be, we don't want there to be, so let me go back to my athlete-centred thing. If you're athlete-centred, there shouldn't be a conflict. If a player is playing for a club and they're also playing for England, we should be able to work sensibly to look at what's right for them medically, whether they need rest, whether actually, and Serena is really good at that. She will work with every club coach. Let's say we get someone in who's perhaps not injured, but maybe he's had a very heavy season or heavy few matches. She'll rest them. She doesn't then exploit them for the use in England. And we will keep good medical records and we'll pass those back. So that openness, which is not necessarily how it works in the men's game, is really important. Because I think that if we put the player at the centre, we shouldn't have conflict. We shouldn't have conflict. It should be something where we want the best for that player. And sometimes that might be not picking them so they can have a rest period, or it might be picking them and giving them a few days to recuperate before you start using them or playing them. So I personally feel, we've tried desperately to keep that as our view, and certainly with our youngsters, I think we do a really good job on that. We've got a really good player centred with the under-17s, the under-19s. We have, for example, the under-17s when they went off to the recent Euros. We had 6 of them, I think it was, taking A-levels. Actually, while they're out there, so we had people supervising, all of that stuff, because you want home, mum and dad, club and country working together with the player in the middle to say what is in the best interest of this player. It's not just winning a football match, because if they fail their A-levels, it's a different. So I think if you put the player in the middle, you don't make bad decisions. If you start to take the interests of the individual bits, then you can end up with conflict. And I think we are trying very much. So let me give you another example. We know we're doing a lot of work now at the centre on player health. We're really pushing the edges around what's going on with injuries. We've got 2 years of data, etc. Well, we could sit there in the FA and just do this, right? This is ours. But that's not what we're doing. We've shared it now with all the clubs. We've asked all of the clubs to nominate somebody who's a sort of direct link with us, so that as new stuff comes out, new data, new information, we can get it out to the clubs quickly. We don't have to do that. But that's because you put the player in the middle, not because you put our interests or somebody, but that suspicion that somehow we're only interested in England winning and clubs are only interested in winning for themselves, we have to get rid of that suspicion. It may exist in the men's game. I'm not as familiar with it. It can't exist in the women's game. And things like the calendar have to be something we're all on side with. You know, we know what England saying to FIFA, oh yeah, that's great, and the club's going, no, it's not. We've got to find a way to work together to say this game is about the players, put the players in the middle and make your decisions. That's my view on that.
It's perfect, and thank you so much. And I think on behalf of a lot of people, thank you so much for what you've done for the women's game. I think it's extraordinary.
Wish I could have done more.